So hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I was just saying, we forgot to serve lunch, but maybe lunch will come later. So thank you so much for coming and having an interest in this really compelling and interesting topic of artificial intelligence. So my name is George Padesky. I go by Georgie. I'm an associate director at Stanford Journalism Fellowships. Can you guys hear me well? No. Yeah. I'm a former investigative journalist, and the reason why I'm here, I'm also a doctoral student here at Cronkite, and also an instructor of a class. Some of you guys are taking the artificial intelligence. Hi, Sam. Artificial intelligence journalism class that really tries to kind of unpack AI literacy and help us understand how do we tackle this huge topic. But yeah, so my research kind of revolves around this topic, but I'm thrilled to say that and thank Professor Sarah Cohen, who's here with us today. She put all of us together for this panel to have a conversation about and offer this is for you guys to kind of learn more about. So on the left, all the way to the left, I'll start with Professor Cohen. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and editor who's here at Cronkite as a Knight Chair since 2018. She spent most of her work on investigative journalism projects. She's specializing in data journalism, public records analysis, and she's, the way how I learned about Sarah, she's author of a seminal book. If you guys never had a chance to read that, Numbers in the Newsroom, the way how you should kind of get into this, the world, so you should check that out, definitely. And like I said, thank you, Sarah, for putting us together and helping organize this conversation. To my left is Marina Walker Guevara, who comes from DC, a Pulitzer Center executive editor, where Marina launched in the last 3 years, launched something called AI Accountability Network, which is a community of journalists around the world that are reporting on AI, kind of investigating AI. Before that, Marina is known as a deputy director. She was a deputy director at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, where she led two of the kind of most prominent, largest collaborations of in journalism history, almost, the Panama Papers project and the Paradise Papers project, which really involved like hundreds of journalists working together using technology to find stories of public interest from the leaked financial data. And for that work, she won numerous national and international awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting. And last and not the least, Garance Burke in the middle, an award-winning investigative journalist coming from AP, coming from San Francisco, whose work on investigating kind of the intersection of government and technology led to many federal probes, congressional inquiries, resignations, but also Garance led the development of a new chapter in AP style book that really offers, which is just one of the reasons why she's here today with us, one of the sort of offering guidelines to journalists on covering AI. So like I said, she's based in San Francisco, and she's leading a team of reporters investigating the power of AI currently. So really, really the top. And she was a Pulitzer finalist and won many journalism awards. So thank you so much for coming and being here. It's a thrill and honor to open up this panel. And I'm going to start with a question that I actually get a lot. And this is sort of like, in the world of AI, everybody's sort of like, okay, Georgie, are you an AI optimist or are you an AI pessimist? Is this AI going to come and kill all of our jobs in journalism, or any jobs, right? Or is this going to transform journalism as we know it and improve the quality and all of that? And I'm always like torn with that question that sort of like tries to simplify this entire notion of this new and disruptive technology. So I'm not going to ask that question, our panel. I'm going to ask a different question. I'm going to ask them, what is one thing that each of you feel personally that you're excited about AI in journalism? So, and what is one thing that concerns you about AI in journalism? And Sarah, let's start with you.
Okay. So thank you so much for doing this, Georgie. And it's really, I'm really honored to be with these two folks here. So I would say that the thing that excites me the most, and I'm going to kind of back up on that a little bit. When I was in grad school in the early 90s, I had a professor who talked about what the journalist of the future would look like. And he talked about 4 roles for journalists. The first one was the great investigator who would hold powerful people accountable. We're all familiar with that. The subject matter expert who would help make sense of the world in very complicated areas. And we've become accustomed to that. The observer who will go places that we can't go ourselves. And then the last one was the shoveler. And that was the person who would just take whatever was given to them and shovel it in front of other people. And my whole career, I have hoped to stay away from being the shoveler. And so I really, the place that I see that the AI, this transformational moment is the hope that, yes, we'll have fewer shovelers in the future. And that if that's your goal in journalism, there may not be a place for you in journalism anymore. But I've almost never met anybody whose goal that was in journalism. So the idea that we can free reporters to do the things that only reporters can do and let machines do what machines do well is a really nice idea. So that's what I think is the great promise of this. And it's been a promise going on for now 40 years with technology. And there are transformational moments, and this may be one of them. And one last thing, I would invite anyone over the age of 35 to think about where we were in automatic transcription of interviews just 10 years ago. And it was still a nightmare. And so that idea that's a simple application that takes reporters out of transcribing interviews and into the field. The fear I have, and I think that Grants would be able to go into this in more detail, but I fear for the equity issue and the people who are making these systems don't have a they don't have a public service mission. They have a commercial mission. And as such, they're making commercially viable products for rich white people. And so I worry about that.
Great. Bobby, you want to take that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of letting the robots be our shovelers. Let them do the work. No, thank you so much, Georgie and Sarah, and it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you. So I come to you from San Francisco, where all around me are billboards in my neighborhood telling me that AI is going to change the world as we know it. It will improve business efficiencies. It'll do the HR for you. It'll make even the cloud better. And so I think there are a lot of promises out there, and the ones that I see, speaking from the standpoint of journalism as really being exciting, is taking on some of that shoveling role. So if we can use large language models to do sentiment analysis of vast data sets we have, or to uncover patterns for us. I think, Marina, you can talk more about this with satellite imagery, or uncover patterns in social media material that we may otherwise be scanning as humans, post by post by post. I think there's really some ways to harness these models to do some of that grunt work of investigative reporting for us if we can understand them well enough to apply them in ways that are ethically sound and also will uncover patterns that we can then verify are true, are worth our scrutiny as news gatherers. The thing that concerns me is these systems are scaling worldwide, and some of the real worldviews of the people who make the models in my hometown are then scaling across the globe and without very much scrutiny. So I think that there's ways in which I think there's ways to interrogate how the very parameters of these models are defined, how the data is parsed, what kinds of variables make up an algorithm, and all of that carries some very human biases with it. Data itself is political, right? And so I think that another bit of both promise and peril that I see here is we all can be AI journalists, and now is really our moment to start to unpack how these systems work so we can all feel equipped to ask difficult questions at press conferences. But the peril is if we don't do that, these systems are not necessarily particularly well regulated. And so we're losing a real opportunity as journalists to hold these systems and the people who implement them to account.
Great.
Thank you so much, and wonderful to be here. Hello, everyone. I come from Argentina via Washington, D.C., and really excited to be in conversation with all of you. What excites me is to see the opportunity that some of these advanced technologies are providing to journalists, especially those who hold the powerful accountable and deal with vast amounts of information, big data. Since my time at ICIJ and now at the Pulitzer Center, I have had the opportunity to work on stories or to support journalists that are working on stories that rely on data that is too vast and too disorganized and too inconsistent. And a subset of AI called machine learning has provided really transformative opportunities to take stories that otherwise would be impossible, virtually impossible to do, and turn them into like literally world-changing pieces of journalism. Just a couple of examples, like the first story that we ever used machine learning was in 2015. So it's also good to take this like historical view. Now everybody's talking about AI, but as Sarah said, this is it's been around for 40 years, and journalists actually, although not a lot of them, but have been using them for a while. So in 2015, when we were doing the Paradise Papers at ICIJ, which was this maze of financial documents leaked, millions and millions of them, we use machine learning for something very important, very simple in our reporting process, not simple, complicated, but important, which was to classify and to organize those documents. We identified that one particular kind of document called loan agreements, transfers of money around the world, were particularly important, but these documents, they all look different. They all had different format and language and so on. So machine learning helped us understand the patterns and then quickly extract those loan agreements from the maze of documentation and then lead reporters to more efficiently follow those leads and do all the human reporting that they needed to do. Fast forward to recently at the Pulitzer Center, also machine learning has aided journalists that wanted to map the criminal infrastructure in the Amazonian, in the rainforest, in the Amazon. And how do you do that in a place that is virtually impossible to penetrate? There was a pandemic raging, and there was criminality that was going, off the charts. So what they did again is they used satellite imagery in this case. So they use eyes from the sky, and they use machine learning. They taught the machine to understand what these airstrips that fuel the criminality in the Amazon, right? You need to get planes to come in, get the goods, get out, get the gold, get whatever is needed. So they taught the machine, this is what an airstrip looks like, and this is like 300 ways in which the airstrips look like in this satellite imagery. Now go and look for more of those. And then got journalists constantly to be interacting with that model, to refine it, to fact check it, to improve it. And the result was, for the first time, they were able to map these airstrips, something that governments and others should have done. Maybe for political reasons they didn't, but the journalists did it. And the beautiful thing that the journalist who started all of this, Joseph Polisuk, he wasn't a data journalist or like an AI expert. He was just a journalist who knew the importance of this story, who knew what these airstrips looked like, who had been there and seen some of them, and was able to then find a good partnership with technologists to get him to the next level, to do that impossible story. He said, I can't be telling the story of like one airstrip at a time. We need to look at the system. Machine learning can help us that, can help us look at the system and tackle the stories in a more definitive way. And then the other beautiful thing is that the New York Times and The Intercept, much more powerful and bigger organizations, they follow on the steps of this one single journalist who had a great idea because he had done great field reporting, and then they also did this story for like bigger regions of the Amazon. So that's what excites me, those opportunities, not to do cheaper, faster journalism, but to do better, more powerful, more impactful journalism. What scares me is that we might, that the industry might want to, rather than take the hard way, because none of this that I described before is super easy, and so they might want to take the easier way of using AI for cheaper, faster journalism, which would be the shoveler's metaphor. That's one concern, and the other concern is that we might, because not a lot of journalists yet have a lot of confidence about reporting about AI and on AI, that we might over-rely on the point of view of the companies, of the makers of AI, because of our lack of confidence to interrogate it, to report about it, and that we might, that worldview, as Karen was saying, might filter in and determine the framing of stories, the content of stories. And of course, these companies are also offering trainings and offering all kinds of ways in which they can, quote unquote, co-opt the media industry. So I think that we just have to be very alert, so we don't do, in this case, what was done, with social media when we became over-reliant on platforms and so on.
Thank you so much. I just want to jump in and say I also have like one of the things that kind of excites me a lot was I would call it a unintended consequence of those who were building large language models, is that some of these tools, like ChatGPT especially, and others, and I don't know if Sarah is going to agree with me, are really nice, kind of doing a really good job in helping you code and do data analyses. And if there's one thing that I could highlight, that would be one. And sort of like the coder, in other words, the developers and coders were like coding this for for all of us in the creative industries, writers, kind of overcome that ability to, now we have the automated writing tool, but this automated writing tool is such a good tool in writing code that actually is going to take over more of the coding jobs than maybe some journalism jobs.
I would totally agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and in terms of like providing those, how the ChatGPT will never tell you, never give you a reference or citation for the type of knowledge that generates, but like in terms of the code, it will always generate the code that you can always go fact check and make sure that it's right. Anyway, just wanted to add that too, and of course I share all these fears.
Well, the joke for many years as reporters were being laid off was people would say, oh, go learn to code.
Exactly.
Now we can tell them, go learn to write, right?
Yeah, you Sarah, remember, it was maybe like 10 years ago, it was everywhere. Journalists need to learn how to code and that sort of thing. right? So now you don't need to learn how to code, just learn how to use ChatGPT. Anyway, but speaking about that, I'm curious, I didn't ask you this question, but are you personally using any of these tools, like ChatGPT, or would you recommend the use? I know, Marina, you talked about these large and big projects, and I remember also the medical implants database was a fascinating another project that came out of ICAJ. But like, do you Poppy use ChatGPT?
Well, one really interesting example that I thought I would share with you all is obviously we're in the middle of a very consequential election year here in the US and around the globe. And so I just did a story in collaboration with the journalist Julia Angwin, who some of you may be familiar with. She founded The Markup and has just founded another media outlet called Proof News. And she gathered a bunch of journalists and elections officials and coders together in New York in January because her team had just built a software tool that queries the 5 most popular chatbots at the same time. Mm-hmm. So you can ask Claude and Mistral and ChatGPT the same question. And with chatbots, it really matters sort of the timing and the phrasing of the question because you'll get a different answer back each time. So this software tool is meant to sort of, take care of any difficulties that could arise from asking at a different time. And we asked really basic questions about people's rights to vote. Like if I live in the zip code 19121, which is outside of Philadelphia, where can I go and vote? And several of the chatbots actually came back and said, you can't. So that was just fascinating to see that even though some of these bots have been, we are assured by the companies that make them, been released into the world with guardrails so that they won't answer basic questions about our elections with information that isn't true, there's still some tinkering that needs to be done, right? Because the bots don't know it all. Often they're trained on material that stops a few years ago, or there's ways to ask them prompts that kind of lead them to go off the rails. So I think what I'm interested in doing is interacting with bots to test their limits. And I think that they can, return really good results if you ask them for a recipe for roasted potatoes, for example. Had some great success with that, right? Or vacations. Yeah. I mean, there's stuff that they're really great.
You did try that?
Yeah. But then again, if you ask them, if you can vote via text message in California, they'll tell you, yes, right, absolutely, just go ahead and send in your ballot via text. So I think there's some really interesting journalism that you can do testing out the models themselves.
I think that for me, one of the banes of working with large sets of documents and data, as Marina suggested, is just the huge variety of ways that people can say Philadelphia, right? Fuzzy matching across data sets has been kind of the goal of reporters for the last 25 years, and it actually does a really good job of that.
Could you explain what fuzzy matching means?
So fuzzy matching is when my name is entered as Sarah Cohen in one place, and it's entered with my middle name in another place, and it's entered with my husband's name in a third place, and I'm the same person. And we need some way to determine, is this person at this place the same person as this person at that place? And so they're also considered near matches. So computers are very literal in that every byte has to be the same in order for it to be considered the same thing. But in probabilistic machine learning in particular, it can give you a score that says this is 98% likely to be the same as this. And that has been something that has been really difficult in the past. I did one project many years ago where we had 2 lists of police departments from across the United States. They came from the same database, so they should have been entered the same way, but they weren't. And just matching those 2 lists of police departments against each other took a long, and we did use machine learning to do it, and even then it took a little bit of time. And so what I think is so different right now is that they work so much better than they did even 5 years ago. That now you can actually use them to do things that take less time using the chatbots and using some of the algorithms than it did before. So yes, I use it. There's a plug-in to R Studio if you use R that is GitHub Copilot is built into it. So you just start typing your code and it guesses what the next line is going to be. About half the time it's right. That's pretty good. It's not bad. So,
Marina, do you have a?
So besides just like playing with ChatGPT, I haven't used it, I would say, for anything too serious or useful, but I do interact with it a little bit because I want to see and how it's evolving and so on. We do use systems that help us that are not generative AI, that are more like traditional machine learning and AI powered to mostly to again analyze large amounts of documents and to extract entities from those documents. When journalists look at large amount of unstructured data, we want to extract like names of people and places and organizations, because that's usually what you are investigating, somebody doing something with a company somewhere. And so these systems, we use one that was developed by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. It's a journalistic organization. Their system is called Aleph, and there's a version of it that you can access online. And we have adapted it for our own purposes. So our journalists upload their documents in that intelligent knowledge hub, and they are able to just do their searches inside those messy documents in a much more powerful way. And also create network analysis to see who is connected to who, which is also something really important. So you go from journalists sitting in a desk, going through many documents and with sticky notes, to journalists interacting with documents in a way that quickly gets them to information that then they can follow and they can take out of the computer and do the traditional reporting to fact check.
Right.
And I would just add, in a very simplistic way of thinking about it, is if you have 30 studies that you need to look at, and reading academic articles is not easy, putting them in and asking what they say, or what are the different methodologies used in these 30 articles, or what differences in conclusions do you see that came out of them. They'll be wrong sometimes, but it gives you, if you think about it as, if we want to look in the details of things and we care very much about the specifics, but getting an aerial view of a landscape of something is very difficult to do as a human. And this actually is a very good purpose of just giving us, here's a mountain over here, and here's an obvious valley. I'm not sure what's in between, but, I can at least start anticipating what I'm about to delve into. And that is really useful when you have a lot of material to go through.
And I would agree with that. I think that summarization is one of those elements that these models are really good at. And there's plenty of ways to get familiar with how they work that are not ethically perilous, right? It isn't like you're going to ask it to summarize these 30 studies you're talking about, Sarah, and then publish that immediately, right? But if you can start sort of familiarizing yourself with the way that the models work and what they might get right and what they might get wrong, that'll serve you whether you're using AI in your journalism or you're reporting on AI. So I think it's really can be powerful to start kind of tinkering with this stuff so that you can just build up your own confidence around asking more questions as to how these models work and where they may be particularly good and where they may fail.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, and we're going to have this in the class. We're actually trying to do some of the replicas of ICAJ projects just to see how prompts can help you kind of write that code if you want. Like medical implant project is a really good one for that. But I wonder, I mean, this is a side question. If I'm not a practicing journalist anymore, and it would be fascinating to have these tools like when you did, Panama Papers and projects like that, when, the access to technology was limited and crazy expensive. But also on the other side, the question of like, how do you protect the confidentiality, especially in investigations like that? How do you protect confidentiality of the documentation of the work that you do as a journalist, right? So how do you protect privacy? I think that's a huge challenge for any attempts like this. I mean, one, you can experiment, but like when it comes to really doing a story, right? Are you comfortable putting your data into ChatGPT or any of the tools?
Well, I'm sure a lot of you have been watching how different media outlets are trying to come up with their own guidelines about how to use AI, right? So I've been involved in that process at the Associated Press, which has been a lot of really robust discussions about topics like this very one. And where we've landed right now is don't put anything sensitive into one of these models. We also are not going to have anything published that has been generated by a large language model without having a bunch of humans involved in that process. So I think everyone's really defining what the right way is to use these tools right now. And I think it's just important to keep in mind, just like we protect sources or confidential material, in other frameworks, we don't go around sharing notebooks with people. You have to think about these models and who might have access to some of the stuff you input as well. So just think of it as a possible assistant who is not entirely trustworthy, I would say.
There are
a good way.
many investigations that are that rely on public data that is not super sensitive, that is not leaked documents and so on. So for those kinds of things, or like Sarah was saying, if you have like 100 papers that you need to, look at it not one by one, but that you want to do some like more intelligent searches digitally. So then I would say in those cases you can use, for example, like Google has Pinpoint is a platform that allows
really
you
tool,
to scan your documents and do all these things that I described before, the entity extraction and network analysis and all that. So if it is not super sensitive and it's public data anyway, you might choose to take advantage of those tools, but you have to make the decision on a case-by-case basis.
I just keep going back to when I was at the New York Times. Our lawyers kept trying to convince all of us, with no success, I will tell you, that putting things in the corporate Google Drive was safer than doing anything else that we could do with our documents. And the reason is that they were all encrypted. We only had the key, and Google did not have the key. And so anytime anybody wanted to go into it, they would have to either do NSA level like cracking, or Google would have to come to us to unlock it. They felt that was safer than having it on a separated hard drive in the newsroom where somebody could break into the office and steal it. So sometimes we go a little bit overboard on thinking that people have more interest in what we're doing than they do. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, obviously it's a conversation to be had, and every company has a different level of security with the systems that they have. We went to Google at the New York Times because the Syrians kept hacking us. So Google was more secure for us than anything that our company could run on its own. So we decided we were not a security company. Google was. Other companies will come to a different, and universities will come to a different answer on that. But there's a big difference between putting something on a Google Drive at ASU, your ASU account, and putting it on your personal Google account. There's a huge difference. So things that look the same can be totally different levels of security, and that's where I think every newsroom has to decide where they come down on. That's a very long answer that probably shouldn't have done.
It's okay. Thank you, guys. This is great. So I want to shift some gears because when I thought about this panel, there are like obviously twofold themes here. One is like, how do we use and leverage AI in journalism and obviously in investigative journalism, but also how do we think about AI as a societal issue and problem? And I want to kind of shift to that question, which is a little bit like our overall theme of the panel is sort of like going beyond the AI hype, as we named it. And so how do you all see the role of journalists, right, in this sort of like new world of AI. And I know many of you with your own work are making statements, but like, how do you think about what journalists should be doing in this world?
I think Garance is probably
Yeah, Garance. Let's start with Garance.
Sure. So, I think that we can play a really important watchdog role as journalists. Obviously, I'm an investigative reporter, so that's my immediate penchant, right? There's certainly a lot of good journalism to be done covering the companies that make these models, covering our human-machine interactions, how our worlds are growing and changing as we kind of become more entwined with these technologies, whether we're driving cars that are powered by AI, or we're using chatbots to, help us write our next novel, or, we're in some cases, using new technologies that are just being explored right now. I'm thinking of some of the VR and AR tools that are coming out now that have some AI components. But I think that as journalists, this is a really high impact area, and it's exciting for everyone to think of this as a story that they can jump in on, whether you cover entertainment or you cover sports or you cover politics. There's gonna be a connection to AI. And so I see it as a real opportunity for everybody to just start, becoming familiar with basic terminologies. We can offer you the AP Style Book AI chapter as a way to get your feet wet, where we have some basic definitions of, what is artificial intelligence, what's an algorithm, what are some of these general terms that might come across your email inbox, and you want to explore a little bit further, because I think it's going to take all of us, coming from all of our different backgrounds with all of our different skills, to really provide that full picture for our audiences as to what AI means for society. And that includes looking at some of the communities that are going to be harmed by these tools. Some of the work that my team and I have done has looked at police surveillance and predictive technologies around the world, and how some of those AI-driven tools were implemented after the pandemic, supposedly with the aim of helping everybody stay safe from COVID. And in fact, some of those tools were later used to halt human rights activists or target disadvantaged communities in different political contexts around the world. So I think that keeping that focus on who benefits, who's making money, who's being harmed, do the models work as intended, are just some basic questions to keep our journalism, really robust around these questions.
You mentioned earlier the election coverage. I mean, you just said that fascinating reporting on use of bots. I mean, this is the election year, right? What we're going to expect happening with AI and elections.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've already seen, deep fakes using audio and video, and I think there's a lot of great work to be done, even here in Arizona, around what election officials are concerned about with this cycle. I think it's something that campaigns are experimenting with on all sides of the political spectrum. It's an area where there's room for collaboration across nation states. So giddy up, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And of course, there are elections in, 50 countries around the world. So journalists in India are very busy covering their own election. And they've been showing, for example, how WhatsApp is being manipulated and used to spread misinformation, but also how some algorithms are added as add-ons to the WhatsApp experience and helping amplify certain messages, amplify misinformation, and so on. So this is an incredibly relevant area to look at. I like to equate the need to elevate the coverage of AI reporting with the climate crisis. We used to say that every reporter should be a climate reporter because climate touches every beat and every part of society. And I think that with AI is similar. Whether we have noticed it or not, like Garan said, AI has transformed your beat already, whether you cover education, social welfare, policing, anything. There are systems that are being automated in the agencies that you covered. There are tenders that are happening where AI companies are competing for contracts. There are public government officials, government workers who are suddenly, finding themselves having to implement models and systems that they don't understand very well. And then there are citizens who suddenly the decisions that are incredibly consequential for their lives, like whether they qualify for social services, whether they can receive parole, whether they are a priority their surgery can be prioritized or not, those decisions are being made by those algorithms. And I should say, government workers are relying on what the algorithm tells them, and usually based on data that can have a lot of problems, because the data, as we have said before, can have biases. So they are making decisions today based on data that was collected before in dubious ways, that has lots of missing parts, where entire communities are not represented. So it is so imperative that journalists start looking into all of these areas of inquiry. And for that, we all need to make a much better job at creating that literacy in newsrooms. We need a lot of newsroom leadership, not so much to rush which is what we are seeing, rushing to see how we can apply AI in the newsroom. Mostly I see it for distribution and efficiency and getting more readers, but how do we create that basic literacy so our journalists have the skill and the confidence to interrogate the systems in their own beats as they are covering these stories, and they can do it from a very human-centered way. You don't need to be a technology reporter. I don't think that, you can be an exception because you have an immense amount of knowledge on technology, but there are journalists out there who are doing this work really well, who have no background in technology. But what they know is that they know what questions to ask, like what Garan said. What system has been automated? Who stands to win? Who stands to lose? What are the unintended consequences? So the technology is designed to do one thing, but in practice, it's actually doing something else. So finding those discrepancies, and then using all the traditional tools that we have, freedom of information. There have been some really good cases and breakthroughs, obtaining information from government agencies about the models and the systems, but also obtaining basic information about communications, what the agencies are talking about with the makers of the technology.
Right. Can I add one thing? I mean, I'd love to see the coverage of this elevated just a little bit, in the sense that we tend to put as the gold standard human decision making. Mm-hmm. And so many of the systems are effectively predicting what a human would do in the same situation. So in the context of, say, criminal justice, when we've had a deeply racist system that extends throughout the criminal justice system, predicting what those humans would be will also be racist. And so what you end up doing is perpetuating the human decisions that have not resulted in equity or in inclusion or anything like it. So I'd love to see a little bit of sophistication among the reporters, understanding that it's a predictive system, not a corrective system. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, we can help turn it into a corrective system, right? As reporters, we can point out that the history wasn't exactly what we would like it to be.
Right. I think that's right, Sarah. And I also think, with this kind of reporting, it can feel intimidating at first, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of this is based on advanced statistics, but you don't need to have an engineering degree to get started, right?
Yeah,
So I think some of the basic principles that are in Numbers in the Newsroom, and no doubt part of your classes here, involve just thinking about what's in the data set and what's not in the data set. As you're saying, Marina, which communities might have been over-policed in the past. So if you're looking at an algorithm that helps, is there to assist police in figuring out which priority neighborhoods they should be sending officers to, if you're looking at historically biased data that reflects the over-policing of communities of color, is going to send the officers right back to those same neighborhoods, right? So there's ways to think about some of these models that kind of break down what's in the data, what's the system supposed to do? Is it predicting something? In the case of a child welfare story that we did, there was an algorithm that was meant to predict whether a kid should be taken from their family because it was likely that they would end up in foster care 2 years down the road if the social welfare agency didn't intervene. And what some of the researchers we worked with found is that actually that system was picking up more black children as compared to white children. And that was, again, what they saw as a problem with the historical data and the over-representation of families of color in this child welfare data. So I think that there's, you gotta kind of step back for a second and say, okay, there's little pieces of this that I can start to understand and bit by bit boost my own learning.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing, in that what we've seen in the last year or two, and Marina would have a better handle on this than me probably, that in Europe, for instance, the freedom of information laws are such that it's much easier to get copies of the algorithms themselves than it is in this country. Those are part of the public record. So in the past year, for instance, Lighthouse Reports has worked very closely with a number of newsrooms to show when people are being kicked off of social welfare programs and how arbitrary the characteristics are built into the algorithm, such as what did they wear to their interview, and things like that. I don't know if you can
so the
expand
police
on
a great example,
supported that
yes.
story, so we got a little bit of a close look into that system. And what was beautiful was, first of all, it took 1.5 years. It was a very arduous process, and it was a persistence of the journalists on those freedom of information requests. And then a final strike of luck at the end, where they were, they kept denying like this one crucial piece of information for them they wanted to reconstruct the algorithm. So they wanted to have all the different pieces, the model, the data, the variables, everything in place so they could basically see how it works and understand if there were biases or in which ways it was discriminating. And then in one of the final emails that they received from the agency in the Netherlands, there was an attachment that apparently came out later that it was by mistake.
Right.
You never know.
Yeah.
But that was the final piece they needed to be able to reconstruct the algorithm. And when they did, they found out that the algorithm, it was built in a way that it was meant to discriminate against migrants, against people who were not from the Netherlands, and against women. So when they were reconstruct and they create like fictional personas, and if you enter in the algorithm the variable like this person is a woman versus a man, and is single, and it comes from Greece or whatever other country, the algorithm, the variables, the result, the scoring will be off the charts. Like this person is like basically red, fraudster. You need to start an investigation immediately based on nothing but the fact that the person just happened, that profile coincided with the algorithms, biases and discriminatory.
Yeah, it was a fascinating project. Yeah.
And had a lot of like positive impact. The city of Rotterdam decided to not to discontinue the use of they were planning to deploy even more algorithms on social welfare, and they have stopped at least temporarily that process. And so that's the impact that we have, that we can see. That's kind of like we call it the holy trinity of AI reporting, because they were able to obtain all the pieces to reconstruct. But we don't need to get to that level of execution, which is amazing, but it's hard, it's laborious. We can do so much more, like really great public interest journalism around AI, just by knowing how to ask the right questions, being close to the communities affected, putting them at the center of their reporting, and following, just being good traditional accountability reporters on this urgent story.
Yeah, just Google suspicion machine, and you're gonna find this fascinating project. I just wanted to say that Lighthouse Reports actually is looking for 3 interns. They reached out to me, and I shared with my class today. So they're looking for a remote fellowship. So they're gonna be teaching. They're gonna be teaching you. You can do this remote for the students, obviously in the room. It's an interesting opportunity, sort of participating in their investigation. Just wanted to say we have a couple minutes more. If you have a question, if you have something to ask our panelists, please, we have a microphone ready. I'm gonna ask just a follow-up to what we discussed, but please join us in asking our panelists. Microphone is there, so please do that. Just wanted to follow up on some of the things that two of you were saying, and give you an opportunity to say that actually both you, Garance and Marina, are actually in this area helping other journalists, through AP Stylebook. AP is going to do a bunch of trainings. The Pulitzer Center is giving grants also through the fellowship. The fellowship network, and now you guys are going to be doing a lot of trainings, as I just heard this morning. I mean, I'm not trying to break the news, but you're kind of trying to be in this area to help other journalists kind of understand what is artificial intelligence, what are the types of questions that you can ask, and all of that. So just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about that work at AP and the Pulitzer Center.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say no question is too simple, so all questions are welcome. And if you want to get engaged in reporting about AI, reporting with AI, I think it's a really great time to dive in, and there's a bunch of different ways to do that. So if you happen to subscribe to the AP Style book or have copies lying around here at Cronkite, the online version has the AI chapter in it now, which is really meant to just be a basic guidebook for you, so that you can start getting your feet wet and get a sense of what these top 10 AI terms mean in really simple boilerplate language that you could plug into a story when you're on deadline. And then there's also a bunch of tips for how to think about questions to ask if public officials or companies are telling you about a new AI model that they're implementing. There's some basic tricks of the trade, things to ask for in a FOIA request, ways to think about illustrating these stories. Quick tip, don't only use photos of robots. We don't really feel like that helps the public understand. And it also humanizes these systems a little bit too much. And then we're also going to have some trainings that AP is rolling out at NABJ, NIH Day, many other conferences across the country and other places around the world. This year we got a grant to help bring more journalists into this urgent area of reporting, and really looking forward to doing that. I know the Pulitzer Center has some trainings too, and it's just a great way to start becoming familiar with new kind of incisive, really unique stories that you could do on your beat, adding in this specialty. And I would say it's exciting when you get, the Holy Trinity as you describe, Marina, but you can come at these stories from so many different vantage points, right? As a journalist, I feel like we have to be like water. If one door is closed, we seep in, underneath, right? And so there's all kinds of whistleblower organizations you can be in touch with. There's documents you can go after. There's, of course, being in the communities you're trying to cover who have experienced AI tools. There's so many different ways to think about this, and just encourage you to bring all of the creativity that you have as journalists to this beat.
Thank you. And just very quickly, say that when you start getting, your story ideas and those projects you want to pursue, the Pulitzer Center offers financial support in the form of grants. If you just need a little bit of financial support to travel or to do your FOIA requests, to do data analysis, you can apply for an AI reporting grant with us. And we also have fellowships. If you want to immerse yourself more fully into this area of reporting, you have the idea for the project. The projects are always at the center of what we do. So you apply with your project idea, but instead of us just giving you money, we give you money, but we also give you editorial support, data and research support, and you are part of a cohort of journalists from around the world who are working together, each on their project, but also collaborating and helping one another throughout 10 months every year. Pursuing your projects. So the next cohort, we're going to open the applications in the summer, and it starts in September. And then finally, we are now in April, in order to scale the access to these opportunities, we are partnering with a great AI reporter called Karen Howe, and also a few other great journalists from around the world, and we are launching what is going to be called the AI Spotlight Series. And it's meant to elevate the coverage of AI, to do trainings on different tracks, like from the basics, crash course, we're going to have the intensive courses, and we're also going to have a course for editors. So we can help editors also better frame and understand the stories and how to better support the journalists when they are trying to pursue the stories. So that's coming up starting in April. The first crash course is going to be in May 16. We're going to try to do a lot of this online so we can, for equity reasons, access more people from around the world, but also we'll be at some conferences. So everything on our website very soon. I hope you take advantage and participate.
All right, so we have people waiting to ask a question. So, Professor Romano.
I'll try and squeeze this one in. First of all, thank you all for doing this and being a part of it. It's been very interesting. Given that you all have your ear to the ground in this area, wondering what you're hearing from a regulatory standpoint. Is there an effort underway to limit the use and access to AI, or on the other hand, is it being seen more as a content-neutral tool that it's good or evil depends on who is using it and how they use it?
I'll take this one real quick because AI is also a breaking news story. So today, the White House unveiled some new guidance, some of which appears to be binding around agencies' use of AI at the federal level. So the Office of Management and Budget came out with a new series of guidelines around ensuring that federal agencies can ensure that their AI systems are not harming people and are also safe. It's up to us, I think, as journalists to track that down to the detailed level and figure out how exactly this is going to work. But I think the regulation piece of this is really evolving, and a lot of it's being done at the executive level. There hasn't been a ton of appetite at the congressional level to take this on, but states are also passing really interesting legislation around the use of AI, including around the use of AI in elections this year. Globally, it's a much more complicated set of concerns. I think in every different country we'll see, attempts at regulating and probably a lot of inaction around that. So it's a good area for journalism to keep that watchdog eye. And sometimes our own journalism makes an impact and spurs further oversight, as was the case with the story I mentioned about the child welfare algorithm that we looked at a couple years ago. That actually spurred a federal civil rights investigation. So you never know. Sometimes your journalism can help prompt further scrutiny as well.
But not scrutiny on AI. Scrutiny
well,
on the issue, right?
On the agency's use of this particular algorithm. Yeah, and it's actually an algorithm that has been a model for child welfare agencies across the globe. So that's another thing too, is often one agency will implement a particular tool and then other agencies will say, oh, this seems to have worked so well, let's try it at home. So you can kind of track it across the globe sometimes.
Go ahead.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for being here today. You guys briefly touched during the panel on the kind of elections going on around the world this year, and I'm working on a story actually about artificial intelligence and misinformation, and I'm kind of wondering what we as journalists can do to help combat the misinformation that is being generated and kind of spewed out of a tube by AI.
That's a great question. Marina, you want to take it?
It's a really hard one, but I think that one way to go about it is to try to understand how these different tools and applications are being used by the political parties. Sometimes it helps to, for example, I see that reporters in the WhatsApp story that I was mentioning before, what they did is like they joined a lot of groups, in this case in India, that were created by the different political parties. So it's fascinating and super structured the way they go about it. But they were part of this group, so they were able to in real time receive the information and the misinformation and disinformation, and then be able to analyze it and even do their own spreadsheets and their own classifications to understand at what pace the misinformation was being sent, what was the methodology. A lot of it is in part is explanatory, is helping more than kind of revealing the big truth, is to help citizens understand what is going on around them, and to try to develop a little bit of that critical thinking of realizing, oh, this is, I happen to be in these platforms, I am receiving these messages, and this is how they are being manipulated, or this is who is behind them. So I think that there's a lot of just basic explanatory reporting that needs to be done, and one approach is to try to experience those systems yourself as part of your reporting, to then be able to explain it to your readers. But
if I can add something, we've been slow as an industry to live where the misinformationists live. We've been slow to really, as journalists, infiltrate, if you want to call it that, Telegram to the level that we should, or Discord, or some of the online areas. I mean, I know a lot of students here are very reluctant to join Truth Social. And our reluctance to live where the people who create the misinformation doesn't let us recognize it as often as we might. So I think that familiarity with what the truth is how we find the disinformation, and how the disinformation and misinformation is being distributed. And that distribution network becomes an incredibly important part of it. So from what a journalist could do personally is really start looking at whether they are plugged into the places where it will emerge, as opposed to after it has already emerged.
Hello. Thank you all for being here. I just wanted to ask what you're seeing in terms of how police are using artificial intelligence, and any advice or stories you have to share about covering that intersection.
Well, I think there's a lot of AI tools being marketed to police, and what you might do if you're looking at this here in Arizona is just try to get a better sense as to what kinds of contracts your local agencies have entered into with AI vendors. It isn't necessarily called AI, right? It might be a predictive policing tool or a new surveillance tool. There's everything from automatic license plate readers to, folks who can run facial recognition on body cam footage to, tools that, like I was talking about earlier, predict which neighborhoods officers should be dispatched to, where crimes might emerge. So I think that there's different ways to approach it. There's, looking through contracts. There's Public Records Act requests. There is also, just trying to source up with local agencies or, vendors to those agencies. Sometimes vendors will want to tell you about their shiny new product and why it's going to help things. Police agencies often enter into free pilot agreements with such vendors, and so there might not be a contract that you could get through a Public Records Act request, but if you request emails with the keyword term for a particular tool that you're interested in, you might be able to find that actually somebody's been piloting this tool for months now. That was the case with a story that we did about a tool called Fog Reveal, which basically took a bunch of information that data brokers had packaged from common apps on people's cell phones like Starbucks and Waze, and then used that to offer service to law enforcement officers to be able to pinpoint geographically where any person in their county was at any particular time, which critics said, went around the constitutional requirement for search and seizure. So I think that but that was really an email public records set of requests rather than going after the contracts, because it was a free pilot. So a bunch of different ways to think about it.
Think also about trade shows. And one of the things to just remember is, just like Google didn't really advertise that Google doesn't do search anymore, it does AI, a lot of these tools that are already sitting in police departments have added AI to them, kind of possibly without even the agency knowing it. That, as it's built into these smart systems, nobody really knows what they're doing, and they may not have a clue that they're paying for AI. So that's where the vendors, as Garance mentioned, getting in touch with the vendors and seeing what they're bragging about at trade shows can give you a sense of that. And then the last thing is also looking, as she also mentioned, looking across the country. These things go like, they just kind of flash across agencies. One agency tries it, they get together, now all of a sudden 30 agencies have it, now all of a sudden 200 agencies have it. To the extent where there's now only 2 or 3 911 systems sold in the United States. So you can get to the point where it is so pervasive that it's not even an AI product. It's just built into everything.
And I would add just briefly a final step also to check on the effectiveness. So once the tools are deployed with all these promises, what actually happens? Because what we are seeing in reporting that we have supported is that there's a lot of false positives. There's a lot of alerts and deployment of police, which ends up over-policing more, again, the same neighborhoods that they used to over-police. And then when you actually ask and get to the bottom of how many arrests have been made, how many criminal cases they've been able to build based on that intelligence, the numbers are very low. We had an example in Baltimore when a reporter investigated an aerial surveillance systems. We call it spy planes. And these spy planes were basically circling around the city of Baltimore constantly. And through freedom of information and traditional reporting, the journalist was able to find out that after 900 hours at some point of surveillance, only 1 arrest had been made. It was, and all these other false positives. Imagine the expenditure, the fuel, the personnel, everything. And it was just 1 arrest when it was promised that this was going to be the tool that was going to end crime in the city of Baltimore. So after that, there were civil lawsuits, and it ended up with an appeal courts in banning the use of the aerial surveillance system and declaring it unconstitutional. And it all began with a reporter in the middle of the pandemic noticing that these airplanes were going on and on. So again, going back to how do we find the stories? Well, we observe first. And if there are planes that are circling your city constantly, that might be the beginning of your story.
Right. Okay. Thank you, guys. I think that there are no more questions. We're gonna wrap this up. Just wanted to ask if any final closing moments. Right. Check out AP's work, through Garance's work on their trainings, Pulitzer Center, and let's investigate AI. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. All right.